Okay, hi everyone, we're back and look, this has just been a ridiculous month, the month of July. There's just been film after film which have been either interesting and on average, really good films. One of the strongest the US summer film blocks that I've ever seen. So today we went and saw Dunkirk, which is from the master filmmaker Christopher Nolan, who I just think is probably the most consistent filmmaker in the world at the moment, and a guy who mixes art with entertainment in a way that really, apart from maybe a James Cameron or someone like that, they're rare, and they're rare that they can do it time after time. So we've just seen it, and look, what did you think?
I didn't like it, especially it was not that good to what I thought, because I've seen one or two war movies, but this one showed it from a lot of perspectives of different people, and I didn't like it.
Okay. Look, I think it's interesting what my son is saying, because you're going to read a lot of reviews which say that this is arguably the best film of the year, and definitely will be in the hunt for Academy Awards. And personally, I thought it was absolutely brilliant. And we're going to talk about that in a second why. But I do think that if you took someone to this film who is used to modern filmmaking, where you are led by the nose and there's an explosion here and intestines here and all that kind of stuff, that person might get a bit of a shock. This is closer to kind of expressionism than it is the more normal by the dots kind of film. And so I actually have got a real concern about how it's going to go in terms of making money. But I thought it was absolutely brilliant, beautiful. This is art. And I'm going to come back and talk about that in a minute. But really, anyone who loves cinema, go and find the biggest theatre, the loudest theatre. If you can see it in 70mm on film, go and do it. This film deserves the best. Right, so now let's talk about Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. If you know anything about World War II, Dunkirk is famous for being a part of the war which was really a military disaster. I'm not going to take you through it all. You can Google it and all that. But generally, you need to know that the British and French forces, some Belgians, were left on the beach of Dunkirk. You know, there were 300 to 400,000 men there, and they'd been cut off by the Germans and were basically going to be exterminated. And there's a lot of controversy in history about why the Germans held back. And again, that would take a whole book to explain. But anyway, they were given this breathing chance. And the problem was Dunkirk is a very, what they call short drafted port and beach. And so you can't get in big ships. And so the British had to find a way around it, and all their destroyers were just being bombed by the German Luftwaffe, and eventually the call went out for all domestic shipping to be diverted and go to the port of Dunkirk and pick up the soldiers and take them back. Now, Churchill thought at best we might be able to get 40,000 people back. And depending on, again, what you read, around 300,000 to 335, 68,000 men were evacuated in one day from little boats, taking them to bigger boats and then getting them back to Britain. So it's just an extraordinary story, but it really resonates. It's a very British story, because at that point there was a real big rumor historically that and this also has been argued many times, that the reason the Germans held out was that the British might ask for a ceasefire to save their soldiers. And that would actually probably have meant the Nazification of Europe. Britain might have then been out of it for now, and that would have allowed Hitler a clean hand to launch what he did very shortly after, Operation Barbarossa, when he attacks the Soviet Union. So there's this kind of really strange loss, which was seen as a moral victory and really talked up in Britain. So Christopher Nolan has now made this film. It's a very short film. It's about 98 minutes, very little dialogue, in which he takes you through what it would be like to be in that battle. And the interesting thing is he uses almost no dialogue. There is no, back in the home country reading a letter from a soldier, no general's room where they set out all the exposition. You are basically thrust very quickly into basically a triptych, which is 3 points of view. The air through the British Air Force, the sea through the home boats coming in, but also some of the usual, the destroyers and the boats trying to get the wounded out, and then the land where the soldiers are trapped. And so you are really telling this story, which is not a classic war film. It is actually a thriller set in a historical battle. And the reason why I say that is a very different way of telling that story. For one thing, you never see a German. There are no Germans. You hear Churchill quoted, but you don't get the big Churchill speech. It is read out at some point by the soldier and they remark about it, but it's not a big over-the-top voiceover. There's very little blood or violence per se. And what I mean by that is, this is like the anti-Hacksaw Ridge or anti-Saving Private Ryan. There's no manipulation of the audience, telling a little story, and then you all know that's the character to follow. What he actually does is he just thrusts you into it, and you are meant to feel what is happening if you were there, and from those 3 different very points of view. And he gives you characters that you can identify with, and without any prompting or emotional manipulation, you identify with what is happening. You're rooting for the soldiers, for the Air Force to, be able to do their job. He also does a very interesting thing in these political times, where everyone is so cynical, skeptical. You have a President Trump, who didn't go to fight in Vietnam War. His father got him out of it. He's talked about, like Senator McCain, as a loser because he was captured while serving his country, which a couple of years ago you couldn't have said those things. And here you have a moral mural where lots of people make very little decisions, which all add up to a lot of people surviving at the Battle of Dunkirk. And some of them are choices just made out of survival, but there are a few times where people just do that thing which is so British. Every actor that I could see is British in this film. I think Nolan must have said this just has to be Brits. And I really think in this day and age, when people now say things which we used to typify with a Nazi point of view, and people don't even blink or kind of go, yeah, I don't like that type of person or that religion, to then see a country which was fighting against real Nazis, I found it really uplifting, beyond just, the craft there. So let's talk about some of the craft. Nolan has probably done, I think he's probably stretched himself to the greatest degree that I've seen before. He's got Hans Zimmer on board, who does this great score. I'm not really a music guy, but the music is fantastic. And it's, again, more a thriller score. You can hear a watch ticking all the time, and half the film you're there just really with your fists clenched because you don't know what is going to happen. He uses just incredible cinematography. I mean, I will say this, I'm not an expert on war films, so I'm loath to say like the best war film ever. It's the best war film I've seen in a very long time, I will say that. And it's one of the most artistic ones. It is almost like a Kubrick. So if you think of Paths of Glory, which was one of the great anti-war films, this isn't an anti-war film, but the way he's put together the coldness of some of the shots, the brilliance of his touch in capturing these images. When you see the aerial combat, it is the first time it really made sense to me in a real sense, as opposed to like a Top Gun sense, how it would be to be in aerial combat. And I actually don't know how Nolan did it. There is a scene where a plane goes through a cloud and it looks like a real cloud. I'm not sure how he did this. Also, very little CGI. So the one down point is it doesn't really look like 400,000 men are there. But there's enough that you kind of get the idea they're on the next beach and all this kind of stuff. But everything looks real. There's very little CGI. I read that when you see a ship there, a destroyer, he borrowed a destroyer from the British Navy and used it for filming. Everything looks real. It's, just shows the craft of filmmaking. It's really hard for me to... This is one of those films where, because it's not hung on this narrative or where they've done something very tricky, it's very hard. You really need to see it and then have a debate about it. It's that kind of film. I'm going to talk briefly about the cast. The cast is top-notch British. Kenneth Branagh, Tom Hardy, everyone talks about Harry Styles has a cameo, Cillian Murphy, but the best actor in it, I think, is Mark Rylance, and he plays, and this is all set out, like within the first 5 minutes, you kind of know where everyone is. And he plays, I don't even know his name in the thing, but he's a normal guy who's got a boat, and he gets the order for the home fleet, as they call it, to go to Dunkirk and pick up the soldiers. And he just, in a real British, noble way, just goes about that and is calm when a lot of people aren't calm and saves lives because of it. So let's now sum everything up. There's no spoilers per se, but what this film does is it transports you in a way that film can, but doesn't always do. And I think it's going to be probably talked about all year. It's going to be at the top of critic lists. And I really think that it had the best sound and cinematography I've seen for a very long time, especially for a film which is depicting reality. You can kind of hide a lot of stuff when you're talking about elves or, spaceships. Everyone knows what Dunkirk would kind of look like, and he has brought it to life. I think Nolan is at the top of his game. He is, really showing how you can bring mastery of technique with the emotionality of humanity, mix them together, and then you get art. And this is a masterpiece. It's just fantastic, and everyone should go see it. And it'd be really good to go see it with someone who knows a little bit about history, because I think you'd have an interesting conversation afterward.